On September 16, 2022, 22-year-old Mahsa Jina Amini died while in custody of the government's morality police for wearing improper hijab. This sent shockwaves throughout Iran. A massive protest movement commenced in response as Iranians demanded justice for Amini and equal rights for women. My name is Sydney Martin, and I'm the program manager and a researcher here at the Iran 1400 Project. I recently conducted interviews with a variety of scholars about the woman life freedom movement. Here's what they had to say.
Well, I think the most recent, I guess I call it the Iranian women's movement, the most recent episode in this movement, which really goes back a long ways, has been, I think, quite extraordinary in that we have seen women of all ages, and I mean literally into young women, young girls in public, private schools, lower than the university level, as well as older women who've gotten behind this new movement and have really shown their desire for their basic fundamental human rights, for their freedoms, for a desire to get the government to understand that these laws that segregate women, that discriminate against women, are in a sense choking up the women of the country. Now, I'm careful. I'm not generalizing to every single woman, but certainly a large portion of what we see among the younger generation, who are oftentimes supported by the older generation of women, indicates that women are just tired of living under this very autocratic system of laws, which are directly intended to limit women's freedoms in every possible imaginable way, whether it's in terms of their decisions regarding future family, marriage, work, freedoms of leisure, not being able to, ride bicycles, motorcycles, dance in public, sing in public. It isn't only that there are strict marriage laws and other laws against women. It's the totality of this regime's wanting to choke women, wanting to really marginalize them, almost make them invisible. And then you have this strong reaction of the women saying, we've had enough. And I know that it was this recent episode, of course, began as a result of a woman, Mahsa, who was arrested and ultimately died under arrest. But I want to just remind us that the Iranian women's movement, some have said, including Farzaneh Milani, Dr. Milani, who's at the University of Virginia, she believes that the beginnings of the women's movement in Iran go back to 1848 when Tahireh, who was a Babi Baha'i, removed her veil in public in front of some 80 men, which, we say this very casually, but we have to put this into context. I would liken that to today having at a very important conference a woman walking in there literally nude. The context is really important. What Tahireh did in 1848 is tantamount to that kind of an action today. But why she did that, why she removed her veil, and she said it very loudly, she declared that it was today that is the day, meaning in 1848, she felt that the world had reached a point where it was time for the emancipation of women. Since then, Iranian women have not relented they have had small or large various movements in which they have continually asked for their equality with men and for their human rights, fundamental human rights. And I think that this is a very important thing to keep in mind, that this is not just a new episode that occurred a couple of years ago. I don't want to go into all the details, but there is a lot written about, even since the 1979 revolution, when the current government came into power, how many different women's movement, how many different episodes the Iranian women's movement has gone through. And always they've tried to work within a system without being violent. And I think this is another very unique feature of the Iranian women's movement, is it is always nonviolent. But the reaction to it is extremely violent and harsh. So I guess I would say that the positive aspects of this movement, so as much as there's a positive to what has happened, which is consciousness raising, which is not only are women bringing to public attention what it is that they would like to see happen in terms of their agency, their free agency to be equal in their society with the men, and also to have their human rights respected. Beyond that, we see that even, I would say, to some extent, globally, there's been a consciousness raising. Of course, with the Iranians who are the diaspora, okay, the Iranians who live outside of Iran. But I want to say that they have also, I think, hopefully, this movement, that the Iranian women have actually impacted the thinking among Westerners, because there is this idea that all women who are of a Muslim background would like to wear the hijab, as it's referred to, or the veil. And I think this movement pretty much challenges that belief, that, not all Islamic women are identical, and not all of them want to adhere to this ruling. And I think especially Western women and men, but especially Western feminists, I think really haven't done enough in writing and publishing things to bring attention to this fact. And I find this a little bit disheartening, because I think one of the most powerful aspects of the feminist movement is that women have typically, traditionally, come together to support each other. And in this case, I don't see that. And I find that very troubling. Anyway, I will, I guess what I'm trying to say is that what is unique about this movement, this current iteration of it, is it questions the whole notion of the choice of dress. It says we women want to have a choice about dress. We don't want to be dictated to. And I think that is a very interesting, but a very important aspect of this movement, this recent development, that hasn't been really embraced, if you will, globally by the West and the East, especially feminists. And by feminists, I don't just mean women, because there are men who are feminists. But this hasn't been addressed enough. The obstacles encountered by the Iranian women under the current movement have been, I don't know how to describe it. It's like a whole government has arisen against the women and is taking every measure in its power to stop them. Needless to say that we know, although I use these numbers, I'm reticent and I use them with great caution, that we really don't have accurate numbers because we don't have access to what's going on firsthand. But we know that some 500 people have been killed as a result of this new phase of the movement. We know thousands are in prison. And we know that at some point during this recent movement, the morality police and the whole government structure really has clamped down hard on women and anyone who might be in public demonstrating by removing their hijab or not wearing their veil. They have, taken photographs of women who drive without being veiled and then find them and deal with them harshly. They've taken women's ID cards away who have been shown to not wear the veil. I mean, I'm just using all kinds of measures are being used to clamp down on women in Iran. But it's interesting that from the information that we get out of Iran, there are still women who are resisting. There are still women who are extremely courageous and go into the public without being veiled. Although I would say because of the very, very harsh treatment of the women under the government institutions, that the women have had to really cut back on their demonstrations for fear of their lives and fear of their bodies being maimed, literally maimed, blinded, beaten up so bad that some of them, never recover from the injuries. So the obstacles are huge, and the obstacles are brutal and violent. And unfortunately, I don't see any indication that this will change anytime in the near future. Well, in the past, I would say especially in the mid 2000s, there was an effort by women who tried to get elected into the parliament and become a part of the government in order to pass certain laws to give women more rights and freedoms. Some of that was effective because at some point the age of marriage was raised from, I think, 9 to 13 years old. Other measures were taken for women's rights in terms of divorce and family matters. And it was done through the government. It was done through the parliament. But unfortunately, there's so few women in the parliament who are willing to go up against what they need to go up against, which is, insurmountable odds. In order to pass laws, I mean, they realize that this is a very difficult pathway to take. So I don't like being pessimistic, but for the immediate future, I really don't see any major systemic or institutional changes taking place in Iran. I see the opposite, that the government has become even more rigid, more oppressive, more willing to clamp down and be brutal in its reaction. So it's a very difficult system. Those who have studied authoritarianism understand this, that it's a very, very impossible system to try to change. And I always hope for more public opinion outside of Iran to bring attention and pressure on what's happening inside of Iran. But even the political climate right now is such that I don't see the nations of the world coming together to try to put pressure on Iran. There's no collective security concept in place to deal with a problem as serious as this, because it's not going to just be, you know, women in Iran, men in Iran who want to get behind women's rights. They don't have the means. They don't have the power in order to accomplish that. It requires an international effort. And unfortunately, that's lacking. And that goes back to my statement, where are the feminists outside of the Middle East, outside of Iran, also in the Middle East? But where are the feminists? Where is that outcry that our sisters in Iran are going through this? And I would say the same for the women of Pakistan, of the women of Afghanistan, the women of wherever, in any part of the world, in Asian countries, in African countries. But where is that global reaction? I think we are far enough in the 21st century in terms of an interdependent world that our reactions have to be far more interdependent. And unfortunately, we're still within the borders of a particular country or the borders of a particular region. And I find this really very outdated. I think this is a very outdated way of thinking.